On September 24, 1957, in Little Rock, Arkansas, Black high schoolers entered an all-white school, making that the first integrated school in America. Out of the 2,000 white students, only 9 were Black. These 9 students were known as the Little Rock Nine, a new concept for all Americans. Integration wasn't even a thought among the people until the 9 students decided to stand up for their rights. These 9 children made history by entering an all-white school, fully aware of being bullied, but did it anyway for their rights as well as their country. They've taught all of America that no matter how hard people push you down, the only thing you can do is push back up. So in the end, the whole country really did take one giant step forward.
After the Jim Crow laws, which legalized segregation, African Americans didn't have many rights. Oliver Brown wanted his daughter to go to an all-white school only a block away from his house instead of an all-black school much further. Also, at the time, all-black schools didn't have as many good facilities such as libraries or gyms. When his daughter Linda was denied admission to the school just because she was Black, he decided to take his case to the court. It was called Brown versus Board of Education. It was so controversial at the time that it escalated all the way to Supreme Court. From December 9, 1952 to May 17, 1954, the court case trials were still raging. The lawyers in the case were Jack Greenberg, Robert L. Carter, Spotswood William Robinson, and Lewis L. Redding. In the end, it was unanimously decided that Brown had won the case under the ruling that separate but equal violated the 14th Amendment. Before the Brown versus Board of Education case, there was another court case called Plessy versus Ferguson. It had ruled that separate was equal, meaning if blacks and whites both had schools, they were equal. Later, when the Brown versus Board of Education case came up, and Plessy versus Ferguson was revisited, it was ruled that separate was not always equal, and having separate schools for black and white children violated the 14th Amendment. After the Brown versus Board of Education case, the next question had to be asked. How was this supposed to be done? From 1954 to 1957, America seemed to stand still. The integration of the schools was intended to be a slow process for the close-minded Americans, but they had seemed to have their mindset on never changing at all. A year had passed and Brown 2 was released. This was a reminder to schools to integrate with deliberate speed. As the years went on, America stayed behind, not willing to realize that times were changing. Blacks and whites deserved to be taught the same material in the same school building. Now it was time for the change. Recruited by Daisy Gatson Bates, the president of the NAACP at the time, 9 high school students were chosen to attend an all-white school. The NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. This group was founded in 1909 during the race riots. The 9 kids were Ernest Green, age 16, a senior in high school and the oldest of the group. Carlotta Walls Lanier, age 14, and the youngest of the group. Elizabeth Eckford, age 16, loved to sew. Jefferson Thomas, age 15, was one of the fastest runners at his old school. Thelma Mothershed Ware, age 16, had an incredibly strong mind. Minnie Jean Brown Trickey, who was 16, loved to sing. Terrence Roberts, also 16, was very smart and always cheerful. Melba Patillo Beals, age 16, was very pretty and talented. She said there were 5 floors of opportunities waiting at Central. Gloria Ray Carlmark, 15, always spoke her mind.
The story begins in Little Rock, Arkansas, 1957, 3 years after the Brown versus Board of Education case. The 9 had positive attitudes, wanting to follow in the footsteps of other black heroes like Emmett Till and Rosa Parks. They knew some people were opposed to the idea of integration, but they weren't prepared for what was actually going to happen. Orville Faubus, the governor of Arkansas, heard that the students were planning to integrate. Immediately, he realized that he couldn't let this happen for the sake of his prized high school being filled with black students one day.
To protect the persons and property of the people of Little Rock.
To stop this, he deployed the Arkansas National Guard in front of the school to keep the Supreme Court-ordered school integration from happening. Of course, this tiny piece of information was not told to the Little Rock Nine.
8 of the Little Rock Nine showed up at the front of the school, greeted by a whole lot of angry white students and parents. The senior of the group, Ernest Green, kept moving forward and the others followed willingly. The angry mob projected very clearly that they did not like the Little Rock Nine and would not be welcoming them into their school. This wasn't just a couple of students, but nearly all 2,000 of the students attending Central High.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the school, Elizabeth Eckford, the ninth of the Little Rock Nine, entered all by herself. She was also greeted by a big angry mob of white people. The 16-year-old girl walked alone, head down low, face stone cold, but still terrified inside. She kept walking, knowing that she was in the right place and that soon it would all be okay. She saw the soldiers and hoped that they would be there to help her get into the school. When she finally reached them, they pointed their guns right at her face, and behind her sunglasses, her eyes began to fill with tears. She knew she wasn't going to go to Central High that day, so she made her way back to the bus stop. For 3 weeks, the Arkansas National Guard kept the nine out of the school, and they all had to do their schoolwork at Daisy Bates's house. Then one day, the Arkansas National Guard left, thinking that the 9 black students had given up. "What will happen next?" said Elizabeth Eckford, and Daisy Bates simply told them to go get their school bags ready.
This time, when they entered the school, policemen helped the 9 secretly enter Central High. Furious that the 9 had gotten in, the mob started making threats.
And so someone made a suggestion that if they allowed the mob to hang one kid, they could then get the rest out.
However, the 9 were ahead of the game, already in police cars speeding away from Central High.
News programs all over the nation were reporting what was happening in Little Rock, Arkansas, when finally President Eisenhower found out.
Directing the use of troops under federal authority to aid in the execution of federal law at Little Rock, Arkansas.
The next day, the 9 students felt powerful with the U.S. forces helping them into the school. However, they couldn't be with them at all times.
But they couldn't be with us everywhere. They couldn't be with us, for example, in the ladies' bathroom. They couldn't be with us in gym. You'd be walking out to the volleyball court and someone would break a bottle and trip you on the ball.
At the end of the year, the senior of the group, Ernest Green, graduated from Central High, and Martin Luther King Jr. attended his graduation. But Orville Faubus wasn't finished though. He was running for his 3rd term as governor and immediately shut down all public schools after he'd won. After Central High shut down, the other 9 went to finish their high school education at other schools, and Ernest Green went on to get his college degree.
This change affected white and black people. African American students got better school facilities with better equipment, which resulted in them getting a better education. White people thought that the African Americans were beneath them, and they were especially scared about interracial marriages or friendships. Also, the citizens of Little Rock were a bit conflicted. They didn't know what to think. Many of the children thought that they should support the Little Rock Nine, but since their parents were completely opposed to the idea, they were scared about what they would say and kept quiet. Some adults were confused too. They didn't know whether to blindly support their governor or think for themselves. White children and parents were furious in the southern states, but up in the north, people were happy about the change. The impact of the Little Rock Nine is still clear today. They started the foundation of the civil rights movement, and if it wasn't for the Little Rock Nine, public schools today could still be segregated.
Now, almost all the schools in the United States have children of many different races. After the Brown versus Board of Education case, people still refused to let black people into their schools, even when it was illegal to not let them in. But when the Little Rock Nine got into Little Rock Central High with the help of President Eisenhower, things finally started to change for the better all across the United States.
When the Little Rock Nine finally graduated high school, they all went on to graduate with degrees from colleges all across the United States. Ernest Green was the first and last to graduate from Little Rock Central High. Elizabeth Eckford went on and graduated with a bachelor's degree in history and wrote books about her time at Central High. Terrence Roberts decided to settle in California and teach psychology. Jefferson Thomas joined the Army and fought in Vietnam. Carlotta Walls Lanier got awarded the Honorary Doctorate of Humane Letters. Melba Pattillo Beals became well known as an American journalist. Thelma Mothershed Ware worked as an economics teacher and counselor. Gloria Ray Carlmark worked as a systems analyst, technical writer, and patent attorney. Later on in 1999, all of the 9 children were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal by President Bill Clinton and the Spring Garden Medal by the NAACP.
The Little Rock Nine broke the barrier of racial segregation in schools. In addition, they broke a strong, invisible barrier that kept African Americans from taking a stand about the way that they were treated. During the Civil Rights Movement, the integration of schools was the first active change to support black people. They didn't have the courage before, but once the 9 children climbed up the steps and into the school, everyone knew a change was coming. The Little Rock Nine created a foundation for the civil rights movement, and the 9 children gave African Americans all over the United States the hope and courage they finally needed to start fighting for their rights.